Dawn came slow over Bittercreek Junction, dragging a pale, washed-out light across the empty railway platform. The fog sat heavy, thick enough to swallow sound, thick enough to make a man feel like he was standing alone at the edge of the world. Even the crows stayed quiet on mornings like this. That was when I, Thorne Callahan, saw her. A shape first, then a trembling silhouette, then a woman, collapsed on a splintering bench beneath the flickering station lamp. She held a small child wrapped in a tattered blanket. Two more curled against her legs, like pups trying to survive the cold. Their clothes were thin. Their breath shook in the air. And their mother, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I was waiting for a supply train, same as I always did at the start of every month, alone, with nothing but my ledger and the dust. But something in the fog shifted, and boot steps cut through the silence. 3 men came out of that haze like wolves stepping into a pen. Rough, unshaven, smirking. They moved toward the woman with the swagger of men who believed no law could touch them. One spat on the boards, nodded at her children, and said loud enough for the empty station to hear, "Thorne says we own whatever's left, and looks like you're all that's left." The woman tightened her grip on her kids, terror flashing in her eyes. The smallest child whimpered. I stepped forward before I even realized I was moving. My boots echoed once, twice, sharp enough to make the men look up. The fog coiled around me as I spoke. "Leave them," I said. "Quiet. Cold. Now." The biggest one barked a laugh and reached for the woman's arm. My revolver was out before his fingers even touched her sleeve. He froze. All 3 did. The woman stared up at me, tears gathering but not falling, her voice barely a whisper. "We have nowhere left." I nodded once, a promise forming in the space between us. "Then you have me." A train whistle screamed through the fog, cutting the moment clean in half, our story already written in the steam rising around us. Thorne Callahan led Evelyn and her 3 children through the iron gate of Callahan Range just as the last colors of sunset bled out behind the hills. The ranch stretched wide and quiet across the valley, acres of waving grass, a windmill creaking in the distance, and a grand ranch house perched like a lonely sentinel on the ridge. It was the kind of home that whispered of money, power, and years of silence. The lamps inside were unlit, the porch swept clean but untouched, as if time itself had been waiting for footsteps to return. Thorne pushed the door open gently, letting the warm interior light spill across the polished wooden floors. The hearth stood cold, though the logs were neatly stacked. The pantry was stocked enough to feed a small army, but no one had moved a chair in months. Evelyn stepped in cautiously, almost shrinking back from the space. She had not seen a home like this in a very long time. The children clung to her skirts, their small faces half hidden, wide eyes scanning every corner, like deer unsure if the clearing was safe. Thorne kept a few steps back, lowering his voice so it wouldn't scrape against the nerves already stretched thin. "There's water in the basin. Food on the counter. Take what you need." He didn't reach for them, didn't step closer. He simply gestured, then turned away to give them room to breathe. Evelyn's shoulders trembled, not from cold but from the weight of deciding whether this was kindness or the beginning of another trap. She guided the children inside, her hand never leaving the smallest one's back. Even as she accepted a bowl of warm stew Thorne placed on the table, she watched him like a cornered mare watches every shift of brush and shadow. He read the fear clearly, so he said the only thing that mattered. "No debt, no expectations. You're safe here, for as long as you choose to be." That night, instead of taking the master bedroom he hadn't slept in for years, Thorne took a blanket and bedroll outside to the porch. "If you need anything," he called through the open door, "I'll be right here." He didn't close the door behind him. He left it open just enough to prove he wasn't a threat. Inside, the children began to thaw first. The oldest boy crept near the window to peek at Thorne lying under the stars. The girls giggled softly when the ranch dog trotted in and laid his head on their laps. Evelyn sat near the hearth, hands wrapped around the warm bowl, watching her children breathe easier. Yet the fear still lingered in her eyes. Fear learned from too many broken promises. Trust wasn't built in a night, but for the first time in a long while she dared to hope it might be possible. Night settled over Callahan Range with a kind of hush that only wide, empty land can hold. The lamps inside the ranch house glowed soft and amber, throwing warm circles of light across the kitchen table where Evelyn sat with her children. The flicker of flame danced over her tired face. Her hands trembled slightly as they wrapped around the tin cup Thorne had set in front of her. The children ate quietly, small bites, careful manners, as if afraid the food might vanish if they moved too quickly. Thorne stayed by the stove, arms crossed loosely, giving the family space while keeping a watchful eye from a respectful distance. After a long silence, Evelyn finally spoke. "My husband died in the mines," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Cave-in. Supervisor called it an accident. Folks like us got no room to argue." She swallowed hard before continuing. "After that, we tried to hold the farm together. Wasn't much, but it was ours." Thorne didn't move, didn't interrupt. His face didn't twist with pity, just a calm, grave understanding. Evelyn went on, eyes distant. Then Silas Vaughan got it in his head that all the land north of the river belonged to him. Came with papers, men, guns. Told me my farm was in the way. When I refused, she stopped, breath shaking. He burned the house. Took the livestock. Said he was teaching me a lesson. The children stiffened. One little girl pressed her face into her mother's side. Thorne exhaled slowly, jaw grinding once before he forced it still. He knew Vaughan's name, knew his reach, knew exactly how many men had suffered under the man's greed. Thorne's silence held weight, anger wrapped in discipline. Evelyn watched him carefully. "You know him," she whispered. Thorne nodded once. "I know the kind of man he is." She studied him for a long moment, then asked softly, "And what about you? Why help strangers?" Thorne's eyes lowered. The lamplight carved the hollows in his face deeper. "I was married," he said quietly. "Lost her. Lost the child, too. Fever took him both before I could do a damn thing." He paused, fingers curling on the table edge. "After that, I threw myself into work. Built fences. Built herds. Built walls around my own heart. Figured money would be enough. Turns out it just made the house bigger and emptier." Evelyn's expression softened, not out of pity, but recognition. Two different lives, two different tragedies, yet the same ache sat between them. Meanwhile, the children began to warm. The eldest boy followed Thorne out to the workshop, fascinated by the tools. The twins giggled when Thorne's old ranch dog, Dusty, rolled over for a belly rub. The baby reached for Thorne's hand, gripping his finger with tiny determination. Evelyn watched it all, realizing for the first time in months that her children were laughing, truly laughing. In that gentle glow of lamplight, amid tired breaths and shared truths, something subtle but powerful formed between them. Not romance, not obligation, but the fragile beginnings of a bond. Two broken souls, sitting in the quiet, finally able to breathe again. The morning broke slow and uneasy over Callahan Range, the pale sun dragging itself across a sky the color of tarnished brass. Thorne Callahan saddled his horse before daylight fully settled, the kind of saddle up a man does when something in his bones tells him trouble is riding close. He didn't speak of it to Evelyn or the children. No sense in stirring fear before he knew the shape of it. But his silence was sharp, and the air seemed to notice. He rode the fence line with the habitual precision of a man who built an empire with his own two hands. But halfway down the northern ridge, his horse suddenly halted, ears pinned forward. Thorne's eyes narrowed as he dismounted. The earth told a story, clearer than words ever could. Deep boot prints pressed into the dirt, wagon ruts cutting crooked lines through the prairie grass, and beside a pile of disturbed soil lay a cigar stub, half-burned, still warm. Thorne picked it up between two fingers. The smell was unmistakable, blackthorn Havana, the kind only one man in the territory smoked, Silas Vaughan, land baron, tyrant, and a devil in tailored boots. He crushed the cigar under his heel. By the time he returned to the ranch, dusk was creeping in. The house glowed warm from the lanterns Evelyn had lit, but the warmth snapped like glass when Thorne spotted something nailed to his front gate, a crude wooden plank, deep letters carved with a hunting knife. "Return what belongs to VORN. Evelyn's breath caught when she saw it. Her hands trembled against her skirt. "He'll never stop," she whispered, voice hollow with memory. "He'll hunt us until—" Thorne cut her off, his jaw tightening. "He will stop." She shook her head slowly. "You don't know him." Thorne met her gaze with a cold, iron certainty. "I know his type." As night fell, the ridge above the ranch began to glow, lanterns, faint and scattered like predator eyes. Men on horseback, watching, waiting, testing the edges of courage. A storm rolled silently across the plains, the kind that changes everything before sunrise. What would you do if a powerful land baron claimed he owned a family, simply because they were vulnerable? The storm rolled in slow, dragging a bruised sky across the Callahan range. The air felt heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Thorne Callahan stood on the porch, scanning the far ridge, where lanterns had flickered earlier. He knew what those lights meant. Trouble wasn't coming. Trouble was already here. He stepped down into the dirt, jaw set, and began the grim work of turning his peaceful ranch into a fortress. Every window of the big house was reinforced with heavy shutters that groaned as he nailed them shut. Every door received a crossbeam thick enough to stop a charging bull. Thorne positioned rifles in strategic corners, the loft, the barn eaves, behind the corral fence, anywhere a man could get a clear shot without being seen. He dug shallow trenches around the front yard and dragged water troughs into place, forming makeshift barricades. Even the livestock were moved into the stone paddock, where stray bullets couldn't reach them. Inside the house, Evelyn Hart worked with a quiet determination that took Thorne by surprise. She moved like a woman who had rebuilt her life too many times to count. While the children watched nervously from the kitchen doorway, Evelyn spread a blanket on the floor and gathered the family around, teaching them hiding routes. Under the root cellar, behind the pantry wall, beneath the coal chute, where even a grown man would struggle to crawl. "Listen to Mama," she told them softly, smoothing her daughter's hair. "If trouble comes, you stay silent. You stay small." The children nodded, eyes wide. Evelyn mixed lye water in a copper basin, stirring it with a wooden spoon despite the harsh fumes. "If they breach the door," she explained to Thorne, "this'll buy us a few seconds." He watched her with new respect, not pity, not fear. Respect. She was no fragile stray. She was forged in hardship just as he was. She took a seat at the table and began loading ammunition with steady, disciplined hands. Each round clicked into place with a quiet precision that echoed her resolve. When she finished, she organized medical supplies on the countertop, clean cloths, alcohol, salve, and tucked extra blankets near the children's hiding spot. Thorne stepped into the room, something small wrapped in a cloth. "There's one more thing," he said. He unwrapped a polished revolver, delicate but deadly. His late wife's. "She was braver than most men," Thorne said, voice low. Evelyn took the gun in trembling hands, tears shining but never falling. "I'll protect them," she whispered. "I swear it." For the first time since she'd arrived, Thorne felt the ranch breathe again, not with fear, but with unity. Their unity. A heartbeat forged from two wounded lives now beating to the same rhythm, ready for whatever night might bring. The night settled over Callahan Range with the weight of a storm looking to tear the world in half. Clouds rolled low across the sky, swollen and black, flashing faint veins of lightning that crawled across the horizon. The wind carried the smell of wet sage and gun oil. Inside the house, every lantern was snuffed, every door latched, every breath held tight. When the first hoofbeats came, they weren't subtle. They thundered down the ridge, echoing like a drumbeat announcing war. Thorne Callahan stood on the porch, rain dripping off the brim of his hat. His revolver hung at his side, loosened in its holster, finger brushing the worn grip. Evelyn stood behind a barricaded door, her children gathered in the safest corner she could make. She whispered steady reassurances, though her hands shook. Then the lanterns appeared, 12 of them, floating like fire spirits behind the shapes of hard men. They fanned out across the yard, rifles slung, slick coats pulled tight, eyes glowing amber in the firelight. And at the center of them all sat Silas Vaughan, perched on a black horse tall as a nightmare. Rain began to spit from the sky, as Thorne raised a gloved hand, stopping his riders. "Callahan." His voice rang across the yard like a rusted bell. "Send out the widow. She's mine by debt." Thorne stepped forward, boots sinking into the mud. "You'll get nothing but bullets, Thorne." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through Thorne's men. Thorne spat into the dirt. "You've bought yourself trouble you don't understand." Thorne's jaw flexed. "I understand plenty." For one suspended moment, the world held still. A horse snorted. Lightning flashed. And then, gunfire erupted. The first shot cracked the night open. Thorne dove behind the porch post and returned fire. Each squeeze of the trigger calm and measured. Bullets tore splinters from the railing. Lantern light swung wildly as Thorne's men dove for cover. Inside the house, Evelyn shoved a heavy dresser against the back door and crouched low. Her children clung to each other, eyes wide. She kissed each forehead and whispered, "Quiet as rabbits." Then she snatched up the revolver Thorne had given her and held it tight. A shadow moved outside the window. The back window shattered inward, glass scattering across the floor. A thick-shouldered outlaw crawled through the opening, boots slipping on the wood. Evelyn didn't scream. She moved fast, faster than fear should allow. She cracked the metal barrel of the revolver across the man's skull with a sharp grunt. He fell face first without a sound. She dragged him away from the window and reset her stance, breath ragged but eyes blazing. Outside, the world had turned into chaos. Thorne fired into the dark as riders swept across the front yard. Mud splashed. Horses screamed. Lanterns swung like stars falling from the sky. Lightning lit up the battlefield, freezing the scene in stark, violent poses. Men diving, rifles raised, Thorne standing tall against a wave of silhouettes. Then Thorne rode straight for him. Thorne braced. The outlaw leader came hard, firing from horseback. A bullet tore across Thorne's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain flared hot. He tasted copper. Thorne laughed. "You're a fool. She's not worth this." Thorne snarled against the pain, lifting his revolver. "She is. They all are." The two men collided in the mud, horse against horse, fist against jaw, gun barrel against ribs. They tumbled from their saddles and crashed hard onto the soaked earth. Thorne grappled him, fist slamming into Thorne's jaw, but Thorne fought like a cornered wolf. Inside the cabin, Evelyn heard the struggle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the shotgun Thorne had entrusted her and stepped out into the storm. Rain hammered her face. Thunder rolled. She searched the chaos until she saw them, locked in a brutal wrestle in the mud. Thorne rolled on top of Thorne, raising his gun toward Thorne's head. Evelyn shouted, voice breaking, "Leave my family." Thorne turned. His gun swung toward her. Time slowed. Thorne summoned everything left inside him, not strength, not skill, just pure will, and tackled Thorne sideways, knocking the gun off aim. Evelyn fired. The blast ripped the air, pelting Thorne with mud and gravel. He flew backward, scrambling, slipping, cursing. The shot wasn't meant to kill, only to warn, to break the monster's confidence. And it worked. Terrified, drenched, and shaken, Thorne scrambled toward his horse. "Fall back," he shouted. "Fall back." His gang fled into the storm, lanterns disappearing one by one into the black horizon. Rain washed across the yard in heavy sheets, extinguishing fires, soaking blood into the earth, turning the battlefield into nothing but mud and memory. And through it all, Thorne and Evelyn stood side by side, breathing hard, shaking, but alive. They had won. Together. Morning came slow, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the ashes of the battle. It pushed a soft gold light across the torn-up yard, slipping over broken fences, scattered shells, and the charred remains of last night's violence. The rain had washed much of the blood into the soil, leaving behind only dark streaks on the mud and the smell of wet wood. The Callahan range looked wounded, but alive. Thorne Callahan sat on the porch steps, his left shoulder wrapped thick in linen, the bandage spotted with drying red. He breathed deep, watching the sky brighten into shades of amber and rose. Despite the pain, there was a quiet steadiness in him, a man who had fought for something worth bleeding for. His eyes followed Evelyn and her children as they gathered near the barn, laughter rising from them like birds startled into flight. Even amidst ruin, the sound felt like the first warm day of spring after a long, killing winter. Evelyn carried a bundle of tools, her skirt damp from dew, her hair loose from the chaos of the night. The children hurried around her, two chasing each other through puddles, one trying to lift a hammer too heavy for his hands, the youngest clinging to her leg and squealing each time mud splashed. They had cried themselves to sleep only hours before. Now they were laughing. And that, Thorne thought, was a miracle all its own. Rebuilding began without a word spoken. It didn't need one. The hammering started first, slow, steady thuds as Thorne replaced the shattered boards on the porch rail. His body protested every movement, but he pushed through. Pain, after all, was familiar company. Evelyn and her eldest patched the barn door next, fitting salvaged planks together like sewing torn fabric. The twins carried small buckets of nails, tripping over each other, arguing cheerfully about which one had more. The baby sat near Thorne's boots, slapping her hands on the wooden step and babbling commands only she understood. Every strike of the hammer, every repaired hinge, every lifted board was a step toward reclaiming something none of them had dared hope for: normalcy. When the fence was mended enough to stand again, Evelyn walked toward Thorne, wiping sweat and soot from her brow. Her eyes glistened, not from exhaustion but from something deeper, a realization that last night shouldn't have been survivable. Yet here they were. "You risked everything for us," she said softly. Thorne shook his head. "I risked nothing. I gained everything." She looked away, tears spilling. "We'll leave once it's safe. I don't want to be a burden. You've already given more than—" He cut her off gently. "Evelyn, look around." His voice carried no demand, only truth. This ranch stood empty for years. Quiet, hollow, like a house built for echoes. But today, he gestured toward her children squealing as they fed the horses. Today, it finally feels alive again. She swallowed hard. "Thorne, I don't know where we belong anymore." He stepped closer, his good hand resting lightly over hers. "You asked where you belong," he said quietly. "Right here, with me." Evelyn's breath hitched. Her hand slipped willingly into his, fingers tightening as though anchoring herself to the first safe thing she'd known in years. The children ran toward them just then, sunlight catching in their hair, painting them in gold. They laughed and pulled at Evelyn's skirts, tugging at Thorne's coat, begging for breakfast, for hugs, for a day without fear. Thorne looked at them, then at Evelyn, and felt something warm, long buried, bloom in his chest. A long-lost warmth returned to the Callahan range. A chosen family was born. Out here on the frontier, a man gets stripped down to the bone. All the money in his pocket, all the cattle in his fields, all the fences he owns. They don't mean a damn when the wind turns cold and the night starts asking questions. What matters is what's left beating inside your chest when the world goes dark. And Thorne Callahan, he learned that truth the hard way. He learned that compassion can't be bought, courage can't be bartered, and a broken family is worth more than every acre a man could ever ride across. When Evelyn whispered, "We have nowhere left," he didn't walk away. He didn't turn his back, like so many others had. He chose to stand, chose to protect, chose to be the kind of man the frontier remembers. Now I'll ask you this. What would you have done in his boots? If this tale spoke to you, then ride with us again. Like the video, share your thoughts in the dust of the comments, and subscribe for more stories carved in fire, rain, and the hard lessons of the Wild West.